make concerning your categorization in a way. I think it's a bit one-sided. I just give you some examples. For example, for public transportation, we were presenting buses. Yeah, the bus has 10 times more friction than rail. You could save much more by changing over to rail, no question. Then you were presenting transportation as something which is run by fuel, by oil fuel only, and that's not true. Basically, in Europe, there's no freight which is running on oil. Nothing. It's all running on electric power. So this was a little bit off. And the last, there's some more points, but I don't want to go in every detail. And the last thing is the categories, for example, the category of army and military, you left out completely.
Sorry,
you mentioned the small categories like healthcare or whatever, but this large category of army, for example, of warfare, you left out completely. Why not putting that in as a category? I just saw the numbers here. For example, I just give you a number. For example, the present wars take 56,000 barrels a day oil. Why is that not showing up as a category? You hide it in transportation, and you hide it in manufacturing, and you hide it in...
That's Dr. Jones.
That's I think your point is well taken, but just so that there is no misrepresentation, when I was talking about transportation, I said explicitly right at the onset, there is no way I can cover all of the issues. I just gave a few examples. I could, for example, have also, I just bypassed completely agriculture. I could have spent quite a bit of time on that issue, which is actually a very, very big issue as well. When I gave the example of the bus, that was just two examples, okay, of various services, energy services. When I talked about the bus, that's the predominant mode of urban transportation in North America. That is not what I would necessarily advocate. In fact, with the closing of the lecture, I pointed out that many issues in fact transcend technology. And in fact, I think what Kara Shaw will be talking about next week is potentially the most important aspect of this overall debate. For transportation, I agree with you. I went to Zurich, for example, and saw the wonderful urban transportation system they have. We could move to rail. That is an issue of urban planning. We also we clearly need to move away from a concept of having these sprawling suburbs where you can't even provide proper public transportation. So that was not advocating buses, it was simply taking one service and showing what the link is. Okay? The second point, freight, I disagree with you. Freight takes place, yes, that is true that in Europe a lot more of the freight is via trains, electric trains primarily, but there is also a very substantial part of the freight in Europe is via trucking and by air. Okay? Now, there are issues. I could have talked about them. So I cannot possibly cover all of the things. And then thirdly, about the armies, I think, you know, I just don't want to get into it. But the estimates, okay, more so than sort of energy wasted to sort of fight wars, if you look at the investments of the order of $300 billion to fight the Iraq war, where could that have gone for renewable energy? That's the question.
Yeah, one comment and a question. First of all, in your discussion of solar energy, you showed how it after a certain point it doesn't displace much carbon dioxide, but that was with mostly thermal plants. And in British Columbia, we have a very small percentage of thermal plants.
That was with wind energy, right?
With wind, yes, sorry. With solar, you suggested that the land area wouldn't be available in Victoria. You know, for it to be self-sufficient. But in fact, what about the rooftops of houses? I mean, this is a very substantial percentage area of Victoria. But the question I want to ask you is, from what you're saying, and comparing what we heard last week, are you saying that technology cannot fill the gaps that were suggested last week in order to provide the 70 to 90% reductions that Dr. Weaver suggested may be needed to reduce global warming?
No, I'm saying that in fact there are many existing technologies that can fill the gaps. What you have to be cautious of is the claims that any specific one can in fact provide the solution in and by itself. There is a lot of debate that's focused just on switching completely to renewable energy. And when I entered the field, I would have that was sort of also one of the concepts that I had. And in as much as I would like that to be the case, the analyses show us that that's not possible. There are limitations. And that's what I attempted to show. That was not to say that you should not deploy wind power, but rather that you should be careful in deploying wind power because there is only as much that you can do with the existing system. You could potentially increase that penetration to beyond the 30%. That would entail a complete redesign of our grid. Okay, because currently the grid has been developed over the last century or so to deal with a centralized power generation concept. And we're talking here about decentralized, diffuse type of power generation. And it requires a change in infrastructure. So what I say is that you have to be cautious and not be dogmatic about what you latch on to, because you may at times be doing a bit of the reverse. I would be a strong proponent of deploying wind power in Vancouver Island, but not to the extent that some people think ought to be done and sort of switch off and build to 50% or so. That was really the point that I was trying to make.